Welcome, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm Frampton Tolbert, the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council. And as many of you know, the Historic Districts Council, we work with more than 500 community organizations across the city on preservation issues. And as we know, community organizations, coalitions, and associations, this is where so much of the actual work is happening. So I'm really thrilled today, and I'm just going to be acting as moderator so you can hear from the experts on the ground, the groups they're working with in their own communities, and how they're making change happen in preservation. So with that, we're going to start by, I'm going to introduce each panelist. I'm not going to go through their whole bio, which is in your program, and ask them to spend a few minutes talking about their community organization and one of the major recent issues that they're engaging with their constituents on. And with that, I'm going to start with Josette Bailey from the Upper Riverside Association.
Upper Riverside Residents Association.
Hi, everyone.
Can you use the microphone?
I spent my young adult life from 15 into my 30s and into my 40s living in Washington Heights on West 158th Street. It's that block you cruise down when you're headed towards the West Side Highway, either going north or going south. And for most of the time I lived there, I didn't really know how historically important it was in that it had been constructed in the 1890s. The designer was a man named John Bolton, and it was funded by the people who built 800 Riverside Drive, the Grinnell family. Prior to the construction of that block, if you would go back to the yards, I know my brother played behind there. It was a place where the Native American people, the Lenape people came to hunt and fish. There's a spring that runs from the East River all the way over to the Hudson River. So back in 2016, I was getting ready to sell my parents' house, and I encountered two people who were working on trying to save the block. Vivian Ducott and Matthew Spady, because they had been made aware that there were plans for certain buildings to be torn down and for a high-rise to be built, yeah. Like from a monster from Golgotha or something. So we started to engage the community in trying to get interested in having West 158th Street designated. There was already a landmarks designation for the area around the Oval Park on West 157th Street. What's that name of that historical designation, Vivian?
Park Historic.
And that's because James Audubon owned a mansion and owned an extensive estate in that area. And it was a community, and Matthew Spady wrote a historical book about it. The Neighborhood Manhattan Forgot. And it's a wonderful community, very rich in history. And unfortunately, despite our really serious efforts, we didn't get much community buy-in. And then it became apparent that a house on 157th Street and Riverside, 857 Riverside, was going to be had been sold to be torn down to have a high-rise project built, and that house was probably the site of an underground railroad station. And the man who had owned that house, Dennis Harris, he had owned a sugar plantation down in Lower Manhattan. He had, I'm sorry? Sugar mill. Thank you. No plantation, no space for a plantation. And he had sold it, and he had purchased the house, and he had moved his company to the water's edge, which was back in that time a place where people could play and ferry boats docked, and there were lots of things going on. So we began a campaign to try to save 857 Riverside. And that campaign, not resolved yet, has been very difficult because we don't have enough direct historical material supporting the fact that the house was an Underground Railroad station to make it so glaringly apparent to our elected officials and other people that it's worth saving, that the house is in a state of limbo. We have persuaded certain politicians, if we were able to reacquire the house, which is now in litigation, that they'd be willing, if we were able to raise a certain amount of money, to also put in public funds for the house. And we've envisioned it as a teaching center and a museum where students could go and where we could learn about the Underground Railroad and the whole abolitionist history of Northern Manhattan, because many of the churches in that area were very active with it. So I want to say something. I don't know how much time I have left. 1 minute. I want to talk about the concept of Sankofa, which comes from the Akan people of Ghana, and it means go back and fetch what you left behind. And I think what we're trying to do with our advocacy efforts, with our website, with our walking tours, with Matthew's book, with the really brilliant RFEs that have been written by the members of this group, is to awaken in people an understanding of the history of Northern Manhattan and an understanding of the city of New York, where most of New Amsterdam was built by slaves, where New York City was the second largest slave trafficking market in the United States after Charleston. There's such an amnesia and such an ignorance. I went through the New York City public school system. I was taught the history of New Amsterdam in the 4th grade. Nothing was ever said about Black people. I had no understanding of the role, the first person to step on Manhattan Island, a mixed-race man who worked for the Dutch East India Company. I had no understanding of the role our history plays in the larger history of New York City and the wealth and the importance of the United States. So, thank you. Oh, one more point. If anyone is interested in joining our small volunteer organization, we would eagerly and enthusiastically engage with you about your interest in joining. Thank you.
And if you can pass it to Sean Corsandi, the Executive Director of Landmark West.
Thank you, Frampton. So I'm Sean Corsandi. I'm the Executive Director of Landmark West. We are an advocacy organization that started in 1985 by Arlene Simon and a lot of dedicated neighbors. And our district follows the footprint of Community Board 7. So we are 59th Street to 110th, Scenic Landmark, Riverside Park through Scenic Landmark, Central Park. And the issues have evolved over the years, for sure. We started off as a group of neighbors really pushing against inappropriate development that was happening along Central Park West and in other areas, and they were able to gain greater protections through designation of the Upper West Side Central Park West Historic District. And it really was a group of neighbors pushing against one agency, the Landmarks Commission at the time. And now, as we know, even scenic landmarks are through the Public Design Commission. We're working more with city planning. We're working with the Board of Standards and Appeals. We're looking at this holistically, and even this week, many of our groups were working with information technologies about the 5G. So the work keeps expanding, but we're still here working with neighbors in the community on a litany of issues that are affecting those blocks.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Sophanie Joseph from Take Root Justice.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a community planner, so mainly I work during the day at Take Root Justice. It's basically a nonprofit law firm. We don't take individual clients, we take group clients, so like community-based organizations. Yes, we do go the route of litigation if it becomes necessary, but we prefer to do negotiation, conflict resolution, try to do transactional law to try to get to a resolution that benefits our clients. Now, our clients are primarily public housing residents. We also do more work with just community residents. around things like just community land trusts. But as far as my personal work within the Equitable Neighborhoods department of our firm is primarily working in tandem with an advocacy coordinator and 2 lawyers to support both our public housing and just low-income residents as they're trying to attain affordable housing in this city. So I'd love to talk with folks about just how I can be of support on a group level, not individual cases, towards advocacy goals. Okay?
Thank you. Our next panelist is Dan McSweeney of the Morningside Heights Area Alliance.
Great, thank you. It's nice to be here. Just want to clarify one thing. I was traveling last week. I'm not with the Morningside Heights Area Alliance. I'm with the Morningside Heights Community Coalition, and I represent specifically a committee called the Just Housing Committee. This is ironic because the Morningside Area Alliance represents all of the institutions in Morningside Heights, and we are very much a grassroots organization that stands in opposition to a lot of the policies of these institutions, specifically Columbia University. So I'm not a preservationist by training, and I'm sure that my fellow panel members and members of the audience have forgotten more than I will ever learn or know about preservation. However, I consider myself a practical guy, and my experience in the military has shown me ways of organizing and hopefully getting things done. And the reason I'm so passionate about all of this is because I was fortunate enough to be born into a family on 111th Street, where my mother came to New York from San Juan, Puerto Rico. My father was a merchant marine from Glasgow. Somehow they met in the Times Square subway, and my story, my family's story, in my opinion, represents the beauty of the diversity of New York City and specifically of Morningside Heights / Harlem. So it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Thank you. And our panelist is Marina Ortiz, the founder and president of East Harlem Preservation.
East Harlem Preservation. Yes, East Harlem is in the house, believe it or not. We were one of HDC's
Six to celebrate.
Six to Celebrate communities, and we work with them to restore a mural depicting Puerto Rican leaders in East Harlem. And murals are one of the passions of mine, the work that we do at East Harlem Preservation to create, to protect, and to maintain, restore whenever needed, murals that we can, because not everything's in our control. And believe it or not, we also do housing opposed, the rezoning. I wish I wanted to shout like Michael did when certain, but empty promises basically with the rezoning and cultural, affordable housing, et cetera. But one of the things we also did was, after a 10-year battle, remove the statue of Marion Sims from Central Park. Now, some people might say, wait a minute, so you're preserving murals, but you're also erasing history, right? No, we didn't see it that way. I grew up in East Harlem, born and raised, and I never knew who that figure depicted all that time until Harriet Washington wrote medical apartheid. And Harlem activists took it, started a petition, and Viola Plummer and others, and I went to support her 10 years in the making until that statue was removed. And if you're not sure who Sims was, he was a butcher who practiced on Black African women and their infants without anesthesia and obviously without consent. And that has nothing. That statue has no place in a Black and Latino community like East Harlem, which is predominantly Puerto Rican, African American, Central American, and so on and so on. So we waged a 10-year battle to have that statue removed, and it created great conversations in public schools, down at City Hall, in the cultural institutions about, why are you doing this? Who is he? And people actually learned more about what was going on with that man than 100 years or however, 1950, whatever, when the statue was moved to East Harlem. And actually it was moved to East Harlem without our consent. And the city argued when we wanted it taken down, they said, well, we don't remove art for content. I said, well, you did. You moved it from Bryant Park over here because they didn't like it, but now we have no say. So we got the statute done. Now, 5 years later, we're waiting for a replacement from an African-American artist who was promised $1 million by the former mayor to create an installation that would honor people of color and people of color in medicine, women of color in medicine who had been brutalized, not just by Sims, but throughout the history of this country and continue to this day. And this is a personal issue for me because as a Puerto Rican, my family has also been subjected to forced sterilization, testing on the birth control, also, you know, so this may not seem like art. And someone actually on the call said art. And I said, art is subjective, right? So Sims, you know, it's a bronze figure that was in the mode of whatever back in the day. And we're not saying like destroy it. We're not. We're just saying get it out of here. You can create a museum of white supremacists if you want. You know, take the Teddy Roosevelt. Okay, but at the same time, we help to protect and restore a mural honoring Don Pedro Arvizo Campos and Che Guevara in East Harlem. And Don Pedro Arvizo Campos was a leader of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, fighting for independence for many years, spent many years in prison, was radiated and killed by the U.S. government. Che Guevara, I think everyone knows who he is, one of the leaders of the Cuban Revolution, went on to fight for liberation in Angola, South America, until he was killed by U.S. forces, right? The people who created that mural did so specifically and intentionally on that wall without permission. It was one of 10 murals that they created around East Harlem. I wasn't there at the time, unfortunately, that honored our political leaders, our cultural icons, etc. And this is the only remaining one. And 2 years ago, some Cubans coming up from Miami decided they didn't like to see Che Guevara. So they defaced the mural. And 7 times they've done it, thrown red paint, black paint, spray paint, and we've gone back time and time again and restored it. And this is a community mural that is not supported by any elected official or any organization. This is an effort that's done by the community because our outdoor spaces are cultural centers for us. We can't always gain entry into these other spaces. So we have our protests there, we have our commemorations, we honor people like Julia de Burgos in front of her mosaic. Those are the things that I love.
Thank you, Marina. So we've heard a lot about very specific issues, the LPC, rezoning, murals and art, NYCHA, but I'd like the panelists now to talk a little bit about how you work to try and engage your community members beyond just single issues and build coalitions. And I'd like to start with Josette.
So I think that in terms of building community interest and commitment, we have to talk about, and we do talk about, how all the various people who have lived in our community, contributed to our community, and are part of that aggregate that David Dinkins called the beautiful mosaic. So in honoring any one group of people's history, whether it's the Lenape people or it's the people who first lived in that community who are now kind of lost to history, or the African people who built the grand edifices of this city and have never been acknowledged by teaching. So we do the Jane's Walk, we do a website, we occasionally do a gazette, which our graphic designer has named Zet's Gazette. Zet's Gazette, in which we talk about various issues, and we seek through our activities to build a sense of community, because although certain people come to New York City to get lost and to move away from the families and the communities that they didn't really feel a part of, even though they were born into, quite often people in New York City don't get to know their neighbors and they don't feel identified with the community. We have a beautiful oval garden that Vivian Ducott oversees with the Oval Association, whatever. But we do lots of things that seek to make people feel they're part of this community. Several years ago, before the pandemic, we did the Juneteenth celebration that politicians came out for, where they pledged their support to us with the caveat, if you can raise half the money, we'll give you the other half of the money. But in front of 857, you have to give people a reason to care.
I'll open it up to the rest of the panelists on this question of how do you engage your community members in coalition building and beyond specific issues?
I'll just jump in very quickly. So the answer to the question, I believe, based on my experience, is obviously folks that are going to get involved in your movement need to have self-interest, or else there's no reason for them to be involved, right? And in our case, it's preserving, promoting, expanding affordable housing. So the self-interest has to be there. But how do you do that without it getting boring, basically, or tedious? And I think that what we try to do, and hopefully successfully, is diversify the way that we offer this content by getting involved in different types of activities, whether it's a rally or a resource fair, or even engaging, as we will later this summer, in entertainment activities through a block association in our neighborhood. So keep it diverse and active and vibrant so that it just doesn't become, a chore. It's got to be something that people believe in and get some energy from, or you're not going to be sustainable. And then the other point, which is really self-evident from the question, is coalition building. How can you engage with other organizations? So earlier in the previous panel, the point was made, why don't we combine zoning with landmarking? That's a great example. How can you identify areas of common interest so that you can create something that more people are going to be open to?
Okay, so during the day I work at a nonprofit, and at night I'm at Pratt Institute School of Architecture. So the educator role part of me is both interested in teaching professionals how they can be better practitioners, but also working with the residents. Outreach and engagement is our primary tactic. In particular, like my colleague, you can't get people to become engaged. They need to have their buy-in. And our particular strategy is public education. We do a lot of training modules around different policy issues like RAD Pact, lead, mold, things like that. So by doing the public education, not only in English, but around language justice issues, so having multilingual access. And it's not that people don't know what their problems are. They may not know how to deconstruct the policies, and the jargon may, confuses me. So by doing that translation for folks, because I don't think it's education. People are living their lives. They can see the problems around them. But doing that translation is what helps to get the buy-in. So I'm not chasing after people, but people are willing to come and do the work because it benefits them directly.
I would just like to underscore the coalition building that everybody's mentioning and education. And one of the things we talk a lot about is edutainment, but it's also sort of hooking people without them realizing the base message. Otherwise, falling in love with the district, falling in love with the neighborhood, the community, so that when an issue does arise, getting them ready to fight for you. And one example we've had, everybody talks about preservation and keeping things, and the flip side of that always seems to be NIMBYism and not in my backyard. And we had a case where our neighborhood came together to fight a development that was out of scale. It was the tallest building on the island of Manhattan, north of Billionaires Row. And a developer had a plan that after the 16th floor, they were going to have a 200-foot tall void. Essentially, a 20-story building could fit in the void, and then they were going to have more apartments above with unobstructed views. And there was a range of different voices. One side had a small co-op, a large co-op, a very expensive co-op. But there were other voices at play. There was a synagogue that was waiting for the new building to be built, because they wanted new space in it and they'd given up part of their land. And so through a variety of different educational tactics, we ended up having neighbors form groups for environmental reasons. So Save Central Park NYC, and they took on a broader issue. Another neighbor who was directly adjacent started a block association. And all the way we were working as a nexus to put them together with other elected officials and run a legal strategy, which ultimately we lost. If you go up to the Lincoln Square area now, you'll see it under construction. But it was a case where the community came together, and a lot of people who never would have worked together found one another in the process.
Great, thank you. Marina, do you want to say anything?
So we're bare bones. We're 100% volunteer. We have no office, no paid staff. We don't take government, corporate, or foundation funding. And yet we've managed to do miracles in El Barrio, you know? We're not always winning, but the reason we do that is because we make sure that we partner with local organizations, and a lot of them have those resources, but we come to the table with them when they need us, because we have really good outreach. Even though we're not in office, we're in your face in the community anyway, at community board meetings, et cetera. But we're also, you know, have a big, strong presence online, so that when NYCHA tenants are protesting the privatization of Washington houses, or the fact that they have no water or heat for months, or gas, or whatever it is, we will give them, you know, space. We will let other people know, you know, from our audience. We also support community gardens. Like earlier today, somebody said, oh, we have so many vacant. Has anyone considered if, you know, which of those are community gardens? Because it may, you know, they're not all just vacant lots. I worked with Picture the Homeless years ago, and we did a vacancy count in all the boroughs. And we did a report that showed that there are more than enough existent empty units in this city to house more than every single homeless person in the city. So all this talk about we need to build more, build up, that's bull. In East Harlem, we have all of 3rd Avenue is owned, not all of it, but a lot of it is owned by a family that for over 50 years has warehoused apartment buildings. And they only rent out the ground floor to commercial tenants, and these apartment units up on top have been empty for over 50 years. So you don't tell me you need to build up to create housing. We just need to change our priorities. So we support local artists as well, you know, with the murals and whatever else they need. We were really big on fighting the rezoning, and through that we built coalitions from all over the city. So folks came from South Bronx, from the Lower East Side, from Queens, Brooklyn, to help us protest the rezoning. In 2017, we took over a community board meeting. We went up on stage and we stopped them from carrying out that vote. Okay, and so a lot of groups have done that throughout the city, and I think that's important for us to partner together with people of like mind and need to get things done. And so that's our approach, is we want to talk to people. We want to talk to people who live here, who work here, who have a stake here, that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. Something that we also talked about in our planning call around the preservation a lot of times is very reactive and not proactive. So how are you all, who are a lot of you are volunteer, you know, how are you able to create space to proactively build campaigns and build coalitions? And I'll start with Josette. I know you talked a little bit about a big tent with affinity groups, and maybe you talk a little bit more about that.
So we haven't been in the situation of being free to just envision our ideal future, but that's actually where we should be going, all of us, because it's not just private developers, it's Columbia, it's NYU, it's anytime we turn around, Northern Manhattan has so many nonprofits that don't pay taxes, big industrial nonprofits, and then they get to steal our land when the city colludes with them in eminent domain. So this is a progressive thought, progressive in the sense that It's looking to the future, not reacting to what's happening in the present. We all need, in our various neighborhoods and communities, to come together to start to define what is the city that we wish to live in. I used to be very active with an environmental justice group, We Act West Harlem for Environmental Action. And right after Sandy, they received a grant from the Kresge Foundation, and we started planning for how the city would cope with a devastating environmental disaster. You know that devastating environmental disaster, as this last week has proven, it's not if, it's when. All of our communities need to have all kinds of resources that make our communities more viable and more nurturing to the community. What do we do when we don't have food supplies being able to come into the city? What do we do when we don't have energy or clean water? So it shouldn't just be about developers who, first of all, get tax credits and tax abatements for building in distressed communities and build nothing for the residents of those communities. Tell me how Hudson Yards got a swatch of Harlem included in their tax abatement.
East Harlem.
Tell me how, in terms of doing luxury development in Harlem or Washington Heights, Westchester is included when the income level of the residents of Westchester is 2 or 3 times the income level of the residents of Harlem or Washington Heights. I don't wish to step on any toes of government, but there's some kind of corruption going on here. And we all need to be in response and in reaction and planning for our future, because the future is here and it doesn't look really great for most of us.
Other responses? How do being less reactive, more proactive in taking the space to do coalition building and
Less reactive?
being more and building the future you want?
Me? Mutual aid is something that we got to learn about in East Harlem with COVID. We all came together and we're still lining up at those pantries. So we do know that we have to take care of us first and foremost. But yeah, coalitions. I have some points for later, so I'll just,
Okay.
I forgot what I was going to say. I think that it's all about relationships, like everything else in life. So the more you understand the people that you're working either with or against, the more you're going to be able to anticipate what to do to create the future that you want. And that's very idealistic, because are we going to create that in West Harlem or Morningside Heights? No, I don't think so. I'm sorry to be negative, but we are really facing a lot of very strong institutional power with not only the universities, but the other nonprofits that own the majority of the land. So if that's the case, then we better start getting involved and do what we can to have that proactivity, because no one else is going to do it for us. No one else cares more than we do, especially when it comes to things like housing. So the answer to the question is know who you're working with, know your enemy, if you will. I don't want to be completely negative because, as I said at the beginning, this Morningside Area Alliance that operates in our neighborhood, we happen to have a very good relationship with the woman who's the director of it. So there's a lot of nuance involved, right? The more you get to know people, the more you will be able to appreciate nuance, understand how to maneuver through it, and potentially develop some sympathy from the inside of the organizations that you're trying to oppose or influence.
Anyone else? I'm actually, I'll let Maureen speak and then Sophie, and then I'll open up to questions.
So our proactive activities is our programming. I spoke before about the public education and the training modules, which are on our website and free and accessible for anyone to download and use. I think there's also the programming that we do beyond that. An upcoming program is, I do affordable housing, but also a newer initiative is advancing Black homeownership. All of these programming is because we go out and, hustle for the money, whether that's grant writing, whether that's going after government money. But it's not about waiting for some benevolent person to suddenly open the perfect grant that describes exactly what we want, but rather about, coming through some community planning process and deciding what you want, and then writing that programming up and going for the grant money. Also is like opening up your perception of where you can get money. It doesn't just have to be US based. It can be foundations and other sources that are abroad that see the situation in the US and want to support you. So our funding is not just US based, but it's about strategically identifying who your stakeholders are, who your supporters are, whether they're in New York City or elsewhere, and like being strategic about your fundraising, okay? So that's our approach.
Rena, do you want to say? All right, well, I will then open it up to questions. Right here? Right.
Hi, my name is Corno. I just have a question about community land trust and what do you see as that playing a role in preserving our communities and neighborhoods?
Hi. I didn't get to interrupt the last session about that, but I will. Thank you for bringing it up. I was also, it's not like just fighting rezoning. We were looking for solutions, right? So we worked very hard to create an East Harlem El Barrio Community Land Trust. And the city did, in fact, give over 4 buildings to that land trust. And these are failed till, I believe it is. And they didn't want to do HDFC. I know that I don't need to go into all of that with everyone, do I? But the land trust, the city turned around, and there's actually a whole coalition, a citywide coalition, to build community land trusts in different neighborhoods by people who are facing rezoning and displacement. The city turned around and says to us, no, you need to reincorporate, and your structure needs to be that your tenants are not going to own the units. So what is the point then? The city does not know how to open itself up for new ideas and innovations. We've been burned so many times, which is why we don't get funding, and why we don't trust City Hall. They will come and promise you the moon, when it comes to rezoning and this and that, but they screwed us over with the land trust as far as I know. I don't know that they were able to push it back, but I got fed up. I said, this is ridiculous. They're not open to new and innovative, affordable ways for people to live in decent housing. They're just not.
Hi, my name is Vivian Ducat. This is for Sean, who I know you kindly played a film of mine. I hungrily read the Upper West Side historic stuff that you post just because I'm born and bred there. But every time I look at it, it's like maybe this time they'll do Northern Manhattan. There's much less money up here, but I think in some ways you could more easily get a grant to support actually doing historic, doing the same kind of historic content that you do for buildings up here. I would read both then. I'd read the Upper West Side and Northern Manhattan.
Sure. Our district is Community Board 7, so we do stop at 110, and we have Laura Friedman above us, so we're happy to work with her. We've done a few events with her, but we've never explored that opportunity. And we're also happy to get that research funded to date. Everything that you're seeing on the Fridays is just out of operating. We've not managed to get sponsorship for it yet.
Would you do it if you had the money for it?
I would talk to Laura and work with her because I wouldn't want to step on another group's toes if that's their district. Our boundary, this was one of the first questions I asked day one, was why we stopped at 110, and going above our district just means going to a second set of community board, full board meetings, preservation committee meetings, and there's really a full-time staff of 2, so we don't have the bandwidth for that. And that's not a cop-out by any means, but this week we had 3 evening community board meetings alone, so it's...
There are not that many of us up here.
Other questions? Yes.
So my name is Mark Barksdale. I'm an architect and an urban planner and a lawyer, and I'm an alumnus of this City College School of Architecture as well as the urban planning program at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture and Planning. My question is for Marina.
Yes.
One of my friends while I was in school was, and I was wondering whether your organization gave any consideration to doing a mural for one of my friends who was Harry Quintana, who started an organization he saw called the Real Great Society, which is a community planning organization.
I'm sorry, can you repeat his name?
Harry Quintana.
Is he from East Harlem?
He was definitely from East Harlem, and he had an organization called the Real Great Society.
Yes, I know. We'll talk. Yes, definitely. Just to say, we also do some good work. You know, we do landmarking and street co-namings and all good things like that. So yeah, let's talk.
Oh.
Hello. Could you please tell me what is happening now with African burial ground? And is it true that Reverend Singletary is working with the developer to be able to tie memorializing the slave remains there to some kind of luxury apartment development?
Yes. So, someone earlier, talked about culture and giving back and all that. And I got to say, like, you don't give up the South Bronx waterfront for a fake hip hop museum, whatever. But some people are satisfied with that. Reverend Singletary is amazing. She fought for many years to get the city to acknowledge that there are African bones underneath the bus depot on 126th Street between First and the FDR. And they insisted there was nothing. And for years and years we met in task force, and they finally went in and found that, yeah, there are people there. And the reason why this all came up is because the bus depot was closed and it was slated for demolition. And thanks to our former council person / speaker, the developers that she brought to the table with the church are going to build a 1 million square foot building with, I believe, only 10,000 square feet gifted to the burial ground for a museum, etc. I have no idea what's going to happen to those souls, the body. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But yes, it wasn't Reverend Six. The politicians, they force you into a corner. And I think she did all she could, and still haven't broken down the bus, broken ground. The bus depot's still there. So 10 years later, come back and ask me.
Other questions? Oh, in the back, very back. Oh. Sorry, what was it? Oh, hi.
Hi. So I live downtown and near another African burial ground, and I did a lot of outreach because they are a lot of property down there is owned by the city and state, and it was very disheartening doing a lot of footwork outreach and the compromises that go through with some of the not-for-profits and offering people things in return for approval. And the pretend not-for-profit folks that end up really working for the politicians was brutal, extremely brutal. I ended up dropping out for a bit of time because it was hard to do all that work and do the community building, and then the community not be able to trust you, or who do we believe, so to speak. And then the people that you're working with, you think you're working with someone that genuinely cares about the community, but they just care about what they can get out of the deal.
Do any of the panelists want to talk about that? I mean, I think within coalitions.
But divide and conquer is an intentional strategy, and it's about how we respond to it, or not respond, but be proactive and know that they're coming with the divide and conquer strategy. The community building comes before outsiders are involved, and if the strength and trust isn't there, it's going to break down at some point. But I'm just saying what I think at this point. But I understand what you went through. It's okay. It's not the first time. We just got to prepare so it doesn't happen again.
I would like to add that sometimes politicians come to our events and they say they will support an issue, and I'm not going to name names because some people are on a trajectory towards success and fame. But I don't know what organizations have to do in terms of getting these people to sign in blood, but there has to be some way that we, the people, can hold our elected representatives responsible. And I don't know how much people pay attention to the future city council race, but for Community Board 10, Central Harlem, Christian Richardson dropped out of the race. And I think it's because she really stood up against that 145 project, and the hate that was given to her by the machine politicians is something unimaginable. Someone had her portrait painted on a truck that drove around Harlem that said, you know, like when you have missing and exploited children on a milk carton, it said missing. She really took a stand for affordable housing and community preservation, and the forces that be, the forces that get paid from every development, the forces that allow landmarks to be destroyed, turned against her. And I think her life was made so miserable that she thought it's not worth it. We really have to be vigilant about our elected representatives. We treat them like they're gods when they come to our meetings. We pay them. They are there to serve us, not to line their pockets. And each and every neighborhood and each and every organization needs to hold our elected representatives responsible and accountable for the things they do.
We do need to wrap up, and I don't want to end on an unhopeful note. I do want to say how inspired I am by these organizations and the work that they are doing on the ground in coalition building, and I hope that you will support all of them in their continued work. Thank you.